Welcome everyone to this new episode on our channel World Seed. This one is dedicated to sustainability seeds, as we mentioned, because we do like to address these important topics around sustainability and how the seed industry is engaging towards this element. I'm Ben Rivoire from the ISF team, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I will be putting different rounds of questions to our experts, speakers, and panelists today. The floor is open for question. You have the possibility to insert your comments and question and chat directly on the platform. So please feel free to do so. And at the end of the discussion, we'll address some of the questions. Before opening and before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to give some background information and also explain the context of today's episode. Because today is an important day. Today is the World Soil Day. And that's the reason why also we thought it will be appropriate to have a dedicated specific session on these relevant and important topics. As you have seen from the FAO video, food, everything starts with a good soil. So it's important to really tackle this topic, and we need good soil and we need good seed. And that's why we thought that those two topics are nicely and closely linked. The purpose of the discussion today will be really to look at some science-based evidence and to see what the seed industry, the seed sector, from seed companies' perspective, but from National Seed Association perspective, are taking action already and should be engaging more towards healthy soil. We know that we all need to work on a sustainable food production ecosystem, while indeed the population is growing. So we need to produce more, but at the same time, we need to take good care of our production support material, the soil in most of the cases. So that's really an important point on how we can produce more, better food, more nutrient on healthier soil, and what we should address in that respect. And that's what really we'll be looking at today. There is hope, and we'll be looking at how the seed sector is taking action toward this direction of healthy soil in a sustainable agricultural production. To help us today, we have a great panel of experts and speakers. So please let me, without further ado, introduce the panel to you. So Bastien Sachet, CEO from the Earthworm Foundation, is with us and will be explaining what the foundation is doing and concrete action on the ground. Nils Elmsgaard is also with us, calling from Denmark. He's the vice chairperson of one of the ISF working group, the Forage and Turf Advisory Group, with a very nice group of participants and experts from seed companies and national and regional seed association to explain also what in the domain of forage and turf companies are doing, or at least trying to address. But let me start with Lauren Comin, calling from Canada. She's the Regulatory Affairs Manager at Seeds Canada, so the National Seed Association of Canada, working with farmers, plant breeders, policymakers around the seed system. So Lauren, thank you for being with us today. And we thought it will be really interesting to have you first on the panel, especially now this report has been released from the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, talking about science in soil. And it's always good to be back on some real scientific-based evidence. And we would like to hear from you on this report, but also maybe some other initiative that on that science-based evidence has helped the Canadian agricultural sector to develop best agricultural practices, looking also at soil health, carbon sequestration, and productivity. So please, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ben. So the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, which Ben referenced, is otherwise known in Canada as CAPI, and they are a not-for-profit, nonpartisan think tank, so to speak, which brings agri-food leaders together to talk about emerging issues that's facing the agriculture industry in Canada. So in May of 2022, CAPI released a report that was developed by their current cohort of doctoral fellows. And the report, Translating Science to Policy Approaches to Increase Soil Carbon Sequestration in Canada's Croplands, really had three key takeaways. So the first is that Canadian cropland represents an opportunity for climate change mitigation through its carbon sequestration potential. The second is that policies and programs can help address barriers to best management practices, or BMPs, and they can also help adoption by including farmers in decision-making processes, providing evidence of ROI, or return on investment, and ensuring that there's access to affordable and effective measuring and monitoring tools. And the third takeaway was that extension related to soil carbon sequestration should provide greater clarity to producers on the state knowledge and the opportunities and challenges in BMP adoption by utilizing science and also data from multiple disciplines. So sustainability has been the focus of agriculture policy discussion in Canada for the better part of the last decade. And prior to joining the seed industry, I was actually working with producers for a decade. So I know that the conversation has been very polarized. Farmers have made significant progress and significant contributions in increasing soil health since the latter half of the last century. And that was primarily by adopting no-till or conservation tillage cropping. Unfortunately, or fortunately, much of these improvements have already been realized. So we're nearing equilibrium. The positive returns on those practices are starting to decline. Optimizing inputs and reducing land passes with equipment is already taking place because it makes sense economically. But policymakers have a lot of challenges in recognizing past achievements. So now we need to start to look for additional improvements that can be made in the future. So just putting it all in the Canadian context, we have another challenge, and that's the extreme diversity of the growing conditions as we move from coast to coast and from north to south. Canada is extremely diverse, and we have cropping and seed production that's taking place as far north as the 50th parallel and as far south as the 42nd. So we do have quite a bit of diversity. Where I'm from, we have land here in the Western Prairies that was once considered too arid for settlement. And now it's the Palliser Triangle and a very highly cropped, productive area. We also have crop on the other side of the coin that's frequently plagued by overland flooding. So our agriculture lands are far from uniform. So you can understand that one size does not fit all when it comes to adopting best management practices for soil health. But despite all these challenges and the ongoing federal discussions, our farmers are really continuing to work towards developing voluntary initiatives to improve their sustainability. So they're not only just trying to mitigate climate change, but also adapt to the changes that have occurred and that we expect to occur, despite our best efforts to mitigate them. So I would say many of the BMPs that are going to lead to mitigating climate change have already been adopted, but not because of sustainability. They've been adopted because they make good economic sense for the farmer. But we still have the constant push for more. And I think the CAPI reports, it outlines a number of what you could call nature-based solutions that in theory, we can deploy to move further. So some of those are cover cropping, planting more legume crops, perennial crops, organic amendments. So what we really though need now in Canada, and I think internationally, is looking at what funding initiatives from the federal government are focusing on. We need solutions that are appropriate in the specific areas, and figuring out how we adopt these solutions to have minimal impact on productivity.
Great. Thank you, Lauren, for capturing also those different elements from the very interesting report. And I think indeed there are some very interesting elements that you have highlighted there. And please, our participants online, if you have any question related to this topic or to the subject matter today, feel free to also put your comments on the chat box. We'll come back to that at the end. But I would like to turn now the floor to Bastien Sachet, from the Earthworm Foundation. He's the CEO there. And I would like to ask you whether this report or those different elements also rings a bell for you, and if you can explain what the foundation is looking at, doing actively, concretely on the ground, and if there is any relevant initiative that you would like to share in relation to good agricultural practices towards living soil. Please, Bastien, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ben, and hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation from the World Seed Organization. So, on our side, Earthworm is a non-profit. We work with businesses. We help them regenerate soils and forests. So we believe that it's by working in their supply chain and really focusing on understanding where their products come from, their raw materials, who's produced them, how they've been produced, that they can re-engage with the upstream supply. What we see is that a lot of the food corporates have, for the last 30 years, silently or progressively disconnected themselves from the upstream. Why? Because it made sense from an economic standpoint to spot buy the raw materials, really mostly on quality and price. But recently, the environmental and social quality, but mostly environmental parameter, has come back very strongly into play, especially because investors in those companies are pushing them to consider their scope 3 emissions, which are mostly coming from soils, forest, and livestock, for anyone who produced land-based products. So naturally, these companies are turning back to their upstream supply and looking at, okay, who are the farmers who supply me and what are their practices? And as it was said before, some farmers have started to apply some of those practices, but in reality, not many farmers are in general applying in a standard fashion all these conservation practices for soils. So we realize that soils today is still an emitter of greenhouse gases, or agriculture, Arab crops, is still an emitter overall of greenhouse gases. And although we see an appetite from farmers to change, there's also big blocks or big obstacles to overcome. So what we try to do at Earthworm is really to work with companies to engage their suppliers, be they grain traders, co-ops, and then we go back to the field, and that's where we deploy solutions, projects, often collective action projects together with various actors. And one thing that I invite you to consider, but I will talk a little bit about it later, is that in the past, sustainability initiatives have only focused on one raw material, let's say palm oil, cocoa, wheat, and you try to get the farmers to do something, in terms of sustainability for that crop. But when you talk about soil, you talk about all the crops the farmer is producing. So it made sense to coordinate the approach between the various buyers of the farm, and that's what we're trying to do as well.
Thanks, Bastien. I think we'll come back indeed into more details after on some specific initiative that Earthworm is also taking on the ground. But briefly, just on this regeneration, can you maybe say a few words about how does it work? And indeed, you mentioned that it's a multi-crop approach, and that's also why it's relevant for us at the International Seed Federation to work with all our 8,000 members to work together toward the same goal, but you also have this Living Soil initiative.
Yes.
Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so the Living Soils Initiative was born when we started to work in Nestlé's supply chain. So Nestlé buying lots of crops all around the world. And they pointed to sourcing regions which is based in the north of France, which is an arable crop region where you have sugar beet, you have corn, wheat, and etc. And potatoes. And from there, we decided to engage other companies that are part of the rotation. So Nestlé is buying the grain. We'd go to McCain, who's buying the potatoes, and then to Lidl, who's buying also some flour, some wheat. Then we engage, alcohol companies that buy the sugar beet. And so this way, we started to get everyone around the rotation and figure out, okay, everyone talks about regeneration, but what does it mean in practice? And so with scientists and a scientific committee and building on the work that has been done by many organizations, we've created a way to measure soil health, which is a set of indicators that are fully open source and that allow to characterize where the farmer is at in his journey. So you see them on the screen right now. What's difficult is that soil health moves very slowly. It's factor dependent, so you can measure it, but it won't have changed much in the next 5 years. So the idea of our work was to say, what are the other indicators that are quite interesting and useful that we can monitor to be able to follow change. And the number of days that the soil is covered is, for example, a good way to monitor. So it's a good proxy for soil health. It shows that the more days you cover your soil, the better will your soil be, the more carbon you will store, etc. So we have a virtuous circle that we can monitor by satellite, so quite easily, quite cheaply as well. And then we can, with these indicators, do two things. One, work on a change process with the farmer and all the organization that supports its change and the way it works. So technical advice, agronomists, etc. And on the other side, we can get the supply chain to incentivize and to put money on the table potentially to incentivize the farmers and reward them for good change. Carbon, but way beyond carbon. We hear a lot about carbon, but it's not just about carbon. So here you see on the screen an illustration of how we take a vertical approach to the supply chain. So we work from the companies to the farmer, but also in the landscape, we engage everyone who is connected to the cropping system, so that they can coordinate, use the same metrics, and start working on soil health together.
Thanks, Bastien. And it's nice also to see how it's connected with what Lauren just mentioned in the report from CAPI about these good practices, cover cropping, diversity of crops, reducing tillage, and these kind of things. So it's nice to see how it's all going to work. And maybe in the second part of the discussion today, we'll go on how, because you mentioned few companies that you're working with, but that will be interesting to see how companies are aware, reacting to that, and how we can really help also in that sense. But before, I would like now to ask Nils. Nils is vice chairperson of our working group on Forage and Turf. So representing all the key major players in the seed industry. Bastien, you mentioned that there is a diversity of crops for the farmers and producer, and indeed Forage and Turf is quite diverse. And that will be interesting to hear first what this group is doing in that respect in terms of discussion, and also hear if you have any concrete example from some company that are already working towards better water management and better nitrogen use in the soil available, etc. So Nils, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and hello all. That's a pleasure to be here. First of all, from the ISF working group or advisory group for Forage and Turf, we are rather new. It's a new setup by ISF, but we are dealing mostly with grasses and clovers, cover crops, forest legumes, and so on. And you can say that these crops are very, very important in many issues to feed animals, to do natural covers, to be the backbone of a lot of production, especially grasses, of course. I'll come back to that. But just to inform you that this advisory group, we have members from all over the world, from the temperate zone in the northern as well as in the southern hemisphere. And we're trying to get together to find solutions in some of the issues we have, which are similar. Of course, we are dealing a lot with seed health and plant health in such. And of course, soil health is also an important topic. We have not touched so much about it for the meantime, but we will definitely pick up that later. Also in the group, just to give you the full picture, we're also dealing with different issues like trying to eliminate illegal practices in the seed market. We're looking at trade arbitration and communication and statistics, and not least plant breeding innovation. And we also realizing that many of the issues we are discussing are very much different from the different parts of the world or even regions. Of course, my own setting is the European Union, so that's where I usually try to live the world. I do actually have an example. I think he mentioned if we do have some examples of what we can look at into soil health. And I brought this picture for you today. It's from the University of Copenhagen. They do have this system. It's called Radimax. And Radimax is the system that you see here. Unfortunately, I'll not be able to point anything, but you can definitely see that it's a cut through of a system that is, it's an outdoor system. So it holds, the whole idea of this Radimax is to try to look what's actually taking place underground. So what you see here is sort of a shelter. So you can control exactly how much water gets into the system, and you can put on the shelter if it starts raining, so you have control of everything. And then under the soil, there are actually some tubes where we can put in some cameras, and the cameras, they can actually follow exactly the depth and the concentration of roots in different depths of the soil. And that's very useful, of course, because we are looking at the very large difference between different varieties of how well can they actually act in a very dry situation, especially when it's a spring dry situation. I think if we can just move to the next one, you can see a few examples of different varieties. This case, it's spring barley. I couldn't find anybody from grasses, but it's the same system. Just in this, you can see 6 or 7 different varieties of spring barley. And there you see root intensity is very different from one variety to another. So of course, if you are in a setting which is dry, especially in the springtime, it could be nice to know that some varieties are better than others. So absolutely, we are getting a bit further on this issue. We have only worked with this Radimax for 6 years, so we are still learning, and it's a combined effort from the University of Copenhagen as well as grass seed company of DLF, potato breeders and grain breeders are also in this project. So that's one example of how we are trying to reach the future for the soil health. Also to try to be ready for the future with new climatic changes. So that's a very important issue, and so we are working on a lot in that field.
Thank you, Nils. And it's indeed always good to remind everyone that all the work that is done in terms of research and development, innovation by plant breeders, by seed companies in order to address those forthcoming challenges. The one that are today for the farmers, but the one that are indeed ahead of us. And I think all this work toward the development of low inputs varieties is a very important one. And thank you for this example. And that brings another important element about public and private partnership, because I think it's a great example of how some private companies, different size, work with academia, with university, to also work on some more long-term issue in order to also have their element in terms of knowledge, technology transfer, and etc. And I think you mentioned the importance of soil health complementary to seed health and plant health, and I think all goes together with that, and also bring all the key actors on board. So
Yes,
the industry and the academy. Yeah, Nils?
Indeed, because it all comes down to a lot of different aspects that has to come together to get the best results in producing those crops. And now you just touched upon private public enterprises, and this is a very good example of that. And at least in my country of Denmark, we have very good relations between public and private entities. So this is a good example of that, and I have many more, but I don't think we have time for that.
No, but I know that Canada is also quite involved in partnership with the public sectors. And I just wanted to return the question back to Lauren. Is there any concrete example from public-private partnership also dedicated to this topic, and how farmers also are interested and also now embrace those kind of new techniques and new varieties that will address those? Lauren, back to you.
Yeah, I would say in Canada, we do have a number of public-private partnerships, but certainly we need to get better. And we've been talking a lot about those partnerships for a really long time. So, I think now really is the time to focus those partnerships on areas like sustainability. In terms of farmers, I talked earlier about the no-till or conservation tillage movement, and now we really need to start working on helping those farmers that have been no-till for decades to maintain those practices, because there are a lot of challenges that they encounter, which do sort of tempt them to tillage. So we need research to overcome some of those hurdles, and I think that's definitely where private industry could come in. Unfortunately, we don't have the same agronomic research capacity in the public industry the public sector that we once had, and a lot of those resources are now lying with the private. So hopefully that's an area that they can work together. And I know Bastien mentioned earlier about the importance of having your soil covered. And in Canada, farmers are starting to play with cover crops, especially in the eastern part of the country. But Canada is a bit unique, I think, in that, especially in the West, the majority of our crops are spring crops. So even trying to add in a fall crop or a winter crop that we do have available, as the plant development sector can have a really positive impact, because there is a harvestable crop at the end, so that can be more attractive perhaps than planting cover crops or forages or whatnot. And I think there are some carbon-focused management practices that aren't going to work in seed production, frankly, but there's others that will. And I'm a big believer in the importance of research. So I think just as much as we research, on the crop production side for grain, we also need to look at the seed production side and see what practices are going to work there and still produce good quality seed.
Nice, interesting, and interesting to see also how the farmers are looking at that as also solution and open to innovation. And Bastien, maybe this one is for you because you work directly with and for farmers, especially smallholder farmers in different parts of the world. How do you see that? How do they? They have some constraint in terms of climatic condition around them. They also have some economic challenges, like they have to make also a decent living out of their production and feed their family, but also maybe try to have a more sustainable way of producing food economically. So how do you see when you come with those new practices, new ideas, how is the takeover on the ground?
Well, I think as usual, you have the pioneers. You have the few percent that have done it for years and are good at doing it. And then you have also the ones who are ready to jump. And then, of course, you have a lot of people who don't want to do anything because they're not in a position to innovate. What we have to see, I think, is all these practices that are related to soil health. You mentioned cover crops, but less tillage and everything. It's quite some work for farmers to jump from one system to another, and when they jump, they are the only one to take the risk. If they fail, if their crop fails, they are the one paying for all the cost of that failure. And the whole world is looking at them saying, come on, do it. A bit like when you see someone who's going to jump from a cliff and you're like, everyone wants the guy to jump and succeed in his jump, but no one wants to jump instead of him. And so what the way I see it is that the role that we have between private and public sector with NGOs, with civil society, is to be able to de-risk that transition. And when I mean de-risking the transition is that everyone takes a little bit of the risk because everyone will benefit ultimately from seeing that transition happening. We need the guy to jump because otherwise maybe the jump off the cliff is not the best metaphor, but maybe like someone who needs to go from one building to the other on a rope. Okay, let's put it this way. So we need to build a net that it will be under him if he fails, because we really need to go from one building to the other. And the challenge we have is we really need to make that transition. Otherwise, we are going to have serious problems of production. And so you have a group of farmers that are realizing that they're not waiting. They're doing it because they are seeing the disagreements, if you want, or the negative consequences of climate change on their crops, on their soils, and they see it directly beneficial to them to do that. But others don't, or they see it, but they are not in the capacity to do the change, and that's where we need to build the support. One thing that I'd like to say is, and just to rebound on what's been said, is that I think there is a huge amount of incentives that could be brought and related in particular to what they're going to do for the world. Clearly, carbon is one, but I think in the supply chain, the resilience of the supply chain is absolutely key. And so food companies can put something, temporary or long-term premiums on some of the crops, or some of the food. Often the raw material price is not a big deal in the final price of the product. So a small increase there will make a big difference for the farmer. So that's a second incentive. We're doing that in practice. So companies like Nestle, McCain, Lidl, they're paying direct premiums to their suppliers who then cascade down to the farmer so that the farmer feels supported. We are exploring what can be done with insurance companies and also with governments, where they have measures, agroecological packages of incentive that can support the farmer in his transition. But finally, I would like also to highlight that in a context where fossil inputs are very expensive, like fertilizer, growing cover crop, even if you don't harvest them, has a bigger business case. If you have legumes in your cover crops, if you're bringing back nutrients through your cover crop, you're investing in your next crop. And of course, you've got the cost of the seed, but maybe that will reduce the cost of fertilizer. So what I see increasingly, and I push for it because I believe in it, is that legume-rich cover crop are an investment, and it's a way to reduce the fertilizer bill. And if you want my opinion, and maybe one thing to think as we're talking about seeds, I'd rather farmers invest in seeds for cover crop and good seed mixes that will enrich their soil so that it's done in a natural way and we are pushing the recycling of carbon from the atmosphere rather than seeing carbon spending lots of money on fertilizers. So one word could be invest in seeds, not fertilizers. That would be my view.
And that's a good point because it's also linked to promotion and communication. You mentioned the incentives that should be given to farmers when using good practices. And I think in some of your studies, you're really looking at these organic matters in the soil and maybe correlate this kind of premium or incentive to what is the result after a few years of good practices. And I think it's a very good way, and also to have organization that can follow up on that and gather data also, because at the global level, it's very important to be, because no one size fits all, as you mentioned, and Lauren also mentioned, because there are some practices that will work in Indonesia, some other that will work in Africa, some other that will work in Western countries. So it's very important to also differentiate those elements. And I think that's where we can also work together to promote indeed access to seeds, and after link that to appropriate and good agricultural practices. And I think it's a very important point in terms of call for action, that in terms of promotion, we should work on that element.
Yeah, and maybe to add on that, I think the seed sector has been active mostly on the crop, but on the cover crop, we see a lot of experimentation from farmers. I know there are growing developments around that, but I think there is a real business and a real opportunity for seed manufacturers and breeders just to figure out what are the right mixes, what are the ones that are going to store the most carbon, what are the ones that are going to allow a biggest fertilizer reduction. And so seeds can be seen as a strong investment, as they are today always, but an investment in your soil rather than just an investment in your harvest. And I think it's a bit of a change of perspective, because it makes you think about what is the function of plants within the soil, rather than just how it can resist better to disease or how it can produce a bigger yield. And I think it's particularly stimulating and interesting for it's a challenge, but I think it's interesting. And it's almost a new market. It exists already, but I don't think it exists at the scale it will go in the coming years.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we just got a question, because I see that we have people connected from Thailand, from Nigeria, from India. It's very nice. We have a question from Papur, and I think it's addressing also this element about different geographical situation and option, that indeed there is no one global guidance about what should be good agricultural practices in terms to make a living soil. And as you mentioned, there are some indeed geographical diversity, and thanks God for that, and also good that we can all work with different type of companies on some specific solution. But Nils, maybe you have some concrete example from Scandinavia, from your part of the world, where maybe you have some options, some solution that might differ from other part of the world. Can you take this question, please?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yes, I do have some examples. In my part of the world, which is Northern Europe, we do actually have some regulations about how to keep the soil green during the after harvest and in the autumn. And the farmers were actually a little bit reluctant in the beginning, but now I think they see the point in keeping the soil as green as possible at all times. And most farmers, they know the soil very well, and it is of course different from one farmer to the other, as well as from one region to the other. So I think you should, in respect of your soil, of your crop rotation, you need to find out which is the best solution for me as a farmer. In the advisory group, we are also discussing on other different issues like cover crops. What sort of cover crops do we need, or what can we recommend? Of course, legumes are very good for storing nitrogen, and that will actually help keeping some nitrogen in the system, in the growing system. So I think we should look more into that. And also, I have another, maybe it's a bit premature, you can say, the discussion or possibility that we are currently discussing a lot in Denmark is the pyrolysis system, whereby we take excess straw or other organic matter and actually make pyrolysis from that. In that way, we can get some energy fuel from that, and leftovers are actually pure carbon that we can bring back to the soil. So if you make it very simple, you can say that you actually ask the plants to pull out carbon dioxide from the air. Then after the pyrolysis system, you can actually maybe have half of that carbon dioxide and add it into the soil as pure coal. And we do believe that coal like that can stay in the soil maybe for up to 300, 400, 500 years perhaps. So that's a way of improving also the soil as a growing media. But it's still on the experimental stage, but we are working very hard on that.
I see that we have some colleagues joining us also from Chile, and that just reminds me on the ICA initiative on living soil as well. And it's a very active organization based in this part of the world, and also looking at some solution for Latin America, Central America, but not only. And it's good to see also linked to this public-private partnership that there are a lot of things doing. And as you mentioned, Bastien, indeed also with civil society organization, NGO, because they have an important part to play on the ground. Lauren, do you have any examples from Canada that you would like to share in terms of farming initiatives or diversity? I think it's also this thematic about biodiversity is very important. So do you have anything to share?
Yeah, first I'd love to say that I love the Bastien's example of the tightrope walking, cliff jumping, because that's absolutely what it feels like to farmers. Everyone's pushing them and wagging their finger and saying you must do these things, but no one's willing to catch them at the bottom, should they not hit the mark. So I love that. In Canada, the crop rotation really depends on where you're farming. We have areas of the prairies that are only deploying a 2-year rotation of wheat and canola. We also have sort of a joke here in Canada that some rotations are snow, canola, because of course we do have snow anywhere from September to May here, depending on where you are. We do have some areas that can incorporate pulses, legumes in the prairies, which is obviously, very positive. And as you move east into Manitoba and beyond, we start to see canola fall out of rotation, and they move more into corn and soy. I think one of our biggest threats to diversity is soil and residue-borne diseases. We've really been hit hard by, say, Aphanomyces in pulses and clubroot in canola that have all but removed those crops from rotation for a period of time in hotspot areas. And when you can't grow, an entire group of crops, it really limits what you can do in terms of biodiversity. We do need a lot of genetic research and seed applied technology research to see if we can build on resistance to those diseases so that we can keep as many crops in rotation as we can. I'd also say that we have a lack of investment on some of the minor field crop types, and Nils was talking about cover cropping types, and we are still relying on varieties that were bred 30 or 40 years ago. So innovation has been stagnant because there's been no demand up until this point. So now we're moving into these initiatives where they're pushing cover crops, and we want to have cover crops not that are just going to cover the soil, but are going to be adapted to our agroecological areas and work within the operation. So we need probably our public programs, because that's it's sometimes difficult to get private groups to invest in some of these niche crops where they don't see an immediate return. But we need our public programs to spend some time on these crops so that we do have varieties that we can incorporate.
I see that we have now some more people from Latin America, Rio. It's nice to see all of those users. Bastien, you were the one also bringing up this metaphor about jumping from the rocks, and let's see how we can jump and go into action. What do you see? Working with organization, policymakers, should we engage more on the discussion platform, on the action side, on the promotion communication side? How can we have a more powerful way to engage, have concrete leverage action on the ground with a legacy in line with all the sustainability angle that all actors want to address?
I think you've been part of the, I would say, the green revolution of increasing yields, and alongside you have the chemical input companies, you've got the fertilizer manufacturers, you've got the likes of Syngentas and Bayers and everything. And this movement that we see sometimes challenges the use of chemicals, I think naively many times, but nonetheless challenges it and explains that it's key to gain back self-fertility and to close the loops on many nutrients by shifting the way we approach growing crops. But unlike these guys, your peers that have been alongside with you working at increasing yield, and thank God it happened, because we would not be able to feed the planet today. I think what you have is that you're producing living material. You're producing plants, or you're giving birth to plants. So I think in that sense, you have a key role to play. And there is absolutely no limit or no obstacle for you as the world of seeds in partnering and more proactively embarking into this discussion around the agricultural transition. I think actually you should do that much more, because when we see who is knocking on the doors to partner and to see how they can, apprehend the transformation around regenerative agriculture, you see a lot of the fertilizer and chemical companies coming along and trying to find, what does it mean for us? Will we have a business? What can we sell in that context? How do we adapt to this? And understandably, that makes sense. But I don't see many seed companies doing that. I don't see the seed world being so actively. So we had the chance to connect, and you invited us there. But it's almost like the seed is one step behind that set of discussions, and I feel it should not be, because you have the opportunity and many tools that the farmer will need. You have the power to orientate research programs. You have the power to push the innovation and to make people understand that some of the solutions are in the hands of what kind of seeds are we going to produce for cover crops, but also for productive crops that we need to adapt to a different type of soil. We've had, for example, very interesting discussions with potato suppliers to Lidl, little supermarket, and they were telling us, look, when we have a soil that is very alive, very full of life, it has an impact on the quality of potatoes. We can't breed the same varieties, not on the yield, but more on the skin and the aspect, and all the specifications from the industries are on certain specs. So somehow, what we see is that when we want to pivot around a healthier soil, it's almost like we have to invent the seeds that will thrive in this environment. And since you like metaphor, I will do another one. It's almost like we need to do the same mileage, but the road is different. And we could do it with a Formula One, where the track is all clean and you have, no problem, no bumps, etc. So the Formula One seeds, they will grow with the right amount of nitrogen, etc. But if you take a dirt road, if you can't put a Formula One on the dirt road, so it's not going to thrive. It's going to break very quickly. And I almost feel that it's the same thing. We have the same distance, so it's not like we want to produce less, but maybe we need a different car to drive on those dirt roads. So on a healthy, very living soil, more self-sufficient system, what are the seeds that thrive to give us the same level of production and quality? So I think these are two key questions. And there are two angles: the cover crops, all the exploration of our cover crops, around cover crops, and how to reduce inputs and close the nutrient loop with cover crops. This is a complete, I think, open area for research and development, and also partnering, co-design with farmers. And we'll come back on that. And then on the productive area, what are the crops that thrive in those systems to give us the same amount of production, etc., etc. And maybe one final word is to say that I think that there are many opportunities to co-design, but traditionally the innovation happens sometimes too often in research labs. And I think the farmers are pioneering things, and you see the movements of farmer, trying to find themselves the tools to innovate in that field. If you guys come to them with an open hand to develop or co-develop the tools, I think there are huge opportunities, of course, with the public sector and research institutes, but more in action in the field kind of research and development.
And thanks for this metaphor. I like this Formula One high-speed innovation also, because we might also have some rally car driver that are following us and passionate about innovation also, and it's a good metaphor. You use also a nice metaphor once about the earthworm, exactly the lombric in the soil, and exactly giving this idea of mixing things together and putting people also together, linking, building those bridges. And I like this metaphor because I think it's all about that. We all have our role to play, and it's interesting to see how we can play our lombric work and to make sure that we all work toward the same direction. Nils, from your side, anything appealing following this discussion you would like to bring up? Are the seed sectors, industry company that you do represent within your group are ready to jump from the cliff and to engage further and to continue innovating on that direction?
Yes, thank you, Ben. I do think or believe that we have jumped already. Maybe it's different from different regions, but absolutely, I can say from my own country, Denmark, that farmers are very innovative and they are ready to bring new issues into work at their own farm. So I think they're very much ready to take that challenge. But everything comes back to innovation in the private sector. I mean, we cannot totally rely on the public sector. I think, as someone else mentioned earlier during this session, that you'll see that the public sector is getting more and more difficult to get funds for developing or reaching the right solutions. So I think very much has to come from the farmers and the companies themselves. If you know what are the frames that you are producing under, then, and if you are giving the toolbox you need, then we'll find a way, I'm sure.
Nice. And we still have a few minutes, so if you have any comments or questions for the speakers, please send them in the chat box. Lorraine, do you have anything you would like to add on from the Canadian perspective, and also maybe from the Seed Canada, how you see this coordination at the country level within the different seed company active on your ground?
We've only really started to discuss sustainability on a sector scale as opposed to a company-to-company scale. Our membership is very diverse, right? From single seed growers to large multinationals. And the large multinationals will have entire departments of staff who focus entirely on sustainability. But at the same time, we have variation amongst our smaller members where we'll have seed growers that are very invested in sustainability on their farms, not only in seed production, but also in crop production, because they're usually doing both. So we are a bit behind in terms of the sustainability discussion overall in agriculture. But I think the good news is we have a really good story to tell, and I think we're going to catch up. So I see sustainability in the seed sector as sort of, having two lanes on the pathway. And the first is just a giant public relations campaign, making sure that the world knows about the positive contributions of seed and seed technologies. The science has come so far and the science is there. That's not the issue at all. We need to make sure our sector is able to deploy the technology, that we have progressive regulation, that our farming community is able to incorporate into their operations. So I think we do need to talk about the positive contributions that we can make on the seed side. And I think the other path then is the working path. Our sector needs to be more sustainable in their own operations. So far, the government lens or magnifying glass hasn't been put on our sector, but it will. Are we using land properly? Are we taking care of our soil and our water supply when we're producing seed? Are we considering development of traits that are going to aid in achieving our climate goals? Are we equitable employers of labor? So it does get complicated because we all have different size members, and I know that's true of any regional seed organization, no matter where you are in the world. But I think internationally, through initiatives and through groups like ISF, we need to make sure that we keep each other apprised of our efforts and our talking points, so that we're able to leverage our strengths and keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Lorraine. And one final word, maybe from Nils and Bastien before we close. Nils, first.
Yes, I think we should actually try to concentrate a little bit more perhaps on communication, because as we just heard from Lauren, we have so many good stories. Absolutely, we can bring those ones forward because we are in close contact with nature, and nature is the system within where we're working. So if we don't comply with that, and if we don't bring forward the very good stories we have, well, we have not done our job.
And we should always link communication with action, or vice versa. Bastien, one final word.
Yeah, on my side, it's not. I would say engage more. I think you're not in the discussions around sustainability, or not enough, from what I've seen around, and I think you have a space to take there. And it's not necessarily to say that everything is fine, but just to co-design. I don't think you have too much advertising to do, but more to listen and to participate and to take inspiration to see, okay, what can we do together? We've got our seeds are huge weapons to fight climate change, and we want to make them available to you. What can we do together? And I think that could shape some very interesting discussions.
Great point. And seed as a starting point. Seed is life, indeed, as we always like to mention. But indeed, we need to engage further and to explain the role of the seed within the agri-food value chain at large. So we'll continue on that. We'll keep this agenda this topic high on our agenda for sure, and for sure we'll keep you posted on that. Thank you very much, Lorraine, Nils, and Bastien, for your time today. I think it was great to have this discussion on the World Soil Day. So happy World Soil Day to everyone, and we need to keep good care of this soil, living soil. And take care, everyone. And Sustainability Yours will keep you posted on the next step.
Thank you.